Just a warning before we begin. This episode contains references to outdated, offensive language and reference to events that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples may find distressing. It also contains the names of Indigenous Australians who've died. Listen with care.
When people hear that I work with First Nations artists here in Australia, they say, oh, so the thing about Gina Rinehart and that portrait.
Do people often complain about their portraits?
No.
People internationally have heard that story, have seen the memes that has been created. You know, it's become a pop cultural phenomena. Probably one of the most circulated images of an artwork in recent time.
It's Australia's Mona Lisa now, right?
Like yeah, it is. That's right.
But you can't get past the grimace.
It would be polite to say the painting does not show Gina Rinehart's good side. She's given an enlarged forehead and several chins.
It's certainly not a nice take on Gina Rinehart, and having met her in person myself, it looks absolutely nothing like her.
There's something slightly uncomfortable about the image, which I think has captured the imagination.
From Guardian Australia, I'm Sarah Martin, and this is Gina, a podcast series about Australia's richest person and what happens when power intersects with other areas of Australian life, like art and sport. Is what Gina Rinehart doing with Swimming Australia sports washing, in your view?
It's hard to think of another label that's more appropriate. So yes, I guess.
It's also about control.
I think it's no one tells Gina Rinehart what to do. Perhaps it all just got too messy and difficult.
And the Hancock family legacy.
This is long overdue, this story, and the power imbalance still remains the same, quite frankly, to this day. It's as simple as that.
This is episode 5, The Portrait. It's 2024 and Bruce Johnston-McLean arrives for work at the National Gallery of Australia in Canberra. He's a Wirrabirra man from central Queensland, who at the time is the head curator of First Nations art. And on this day, a new artwork is on its way in.
It's one of the coolest things about the job, really. You do all the paperwork and everything to bring it in, and it takes a few weeks, and you're kind of anxiously waiting on it. And then you get the notification that it's downstairs. So you kind of rush down as soon as you get that notification, and you get to see at least all of the parts of it in the viewing room.
Included in that delivery is a portrait of Gina Rinehart, painted by Western Arrunda artist Vincent Namatjira. Together with 20 other portraits, it makes up a work called Australia in Colour.
And I remember just being blown away by it. It's quite a big work, so it took up an entire wall and was extremely powerful. So the paintings each are acrylic and very high tone. Many of them capture particular characteristic of the portrait rather than trying to be a full representation of all of the parts of that person and their image. There are images of politicians like Julia, and there are images of his own family members, but they all come together to create the image that he understands of what Australia is. It's hectic, it's vibrant, it's beautiful, it's ugly, it's all sorts of things. It's messy. Like a lot of Vincent's works, it's naive, it has touches of whimsy, but for me it was just one of that group of works. And knowing Vincent, knowing who he is, knowing his character of being so gentle, non-confrontational, it never struck me as being an image that was trying to really poke fun at Gina.
Australia in Colour goes on the wall at the NGA on the 2nd of March 2024, and it obviously strikes a nerve with Gina, because about a month later, she starts writing letters. First, she writes to Ryan Stokes, a senior executive in his father Kerry Stokes' business empire and chair of the NGA, and asks him to permanently dispose of the portrait. Stokes forwards this letter to the NGA director, Nick Mitsevich. Gina Rinehart then addresses both of them in a letter dated April 15, obtained by the media through Freedom of Information. In it, Gina says she was informed about the portrait by a concerned friend. That letter has been quite heavily redacted, but we've had parts of it read out by a voice actor.
Dear Ryan and Dr. Mitsevich, I've had the pleasure of attending annual functions for the National Art Gallery several times, done fantastically, very enjoyable, even uplifting. To have a National Art Gallery that presents the best our country has to offer, makes us proud of our nation and inspires people, including with outstanding artworks from other countries, is, in my view, a very worthy purpose. In my view, and I believe that of many, many good Australians, our National Gallery should plan differently. Sincerely, Gina Rinehart.
Meanwhile, staff at the NGA start to notice something.
I remember I was walking past the directorate, and the director called me over and just said that people had started to send these email complaints.
And what was your initial reaction when you heard of these complaints?
I just had a bit of a giggle, to be honest. I don't think anyone took them particularly seriously.
All up, there were 26 complaints received by email. They refer to the portrait as offensive, insulting and derogatory. They urge the gallery to remove it. And who were those complaints from initially?
Those complaints, as I understand it, it turned out that most of them were affiliated in some way with Gina. So employees, and then, of course, more famously, members of the Australian swim team.
About 20 of those complaints come from Australia's most elite swimmers. The names of these individuals have also been redacted, but we do know that the charge was led by two people. The first was Olympic gold medalist Kyle Chalmers, who said to the Sydney Morning Herald, "I think she just deserves to be praised and looked upon definitely a lot better than what the portraits have made her out to be." Also in the fray was the head of Swimming Queensland, Kevin Hassman, interviewed here on ABC Radio.
We were approached by Kyle Chalmers with concerns about the portrait itself. We confirmed that, a significant number of swimmers felt that way. And having seen the portrait myself, it made sense that we would respectfully, and I emphasise respectfully, contact the gallery, make them aware of the way that we were perceiving it, and hope that they might consider taking it down.
What is wrong with the portrait and how it's perceived? Why are you worried about how a portrait by a recognised artist is perceived, Kevin Hassman?
Look, I'm a sports administrator, so art's certainly not my forte, but I guess from a simple perspective, that offence is offence, and society these days, I guess, is riddled with complaints of someone offending somebody else.
And then it sort of became quite an interesting cultural phenomenon.
In news from Down Under, a billionaire has called for the removal of an unflattering portrait of her from the National Gallery of Australia. But I mean, come on, how unflattering could this portrait possibly? Okay, I gotta say.
By the 20th of May, the portrait had gone viral. Gina's attempts to erase it had done the complete opposite.
This portrait, let's have a look at the portrait. What's the problem? Why doesn't she like that portrait?
Oh, I see why she's mad. They left off the pearls.
There you go.
And by the end of May, the controversy had even made its way to the Senate.
Ms. Gina Rinehart in the portrait gallery? Yes.
Adding to the saga was the fact that Gina had also gifted a portrait of herself to the National Portrait Gallery.
Oh, right. So she would like this one hung? But only in a particular way? Yes. Uh-huh.
For a National Gallery to take a painting off the wall because somebody thought it was unflattering would be a very big statement to make against an artist. So I don't think that there was, for any second, a real contemplation of taking the work off the wall.
And what happened with visitor numbers to the gallery?
Oh, the show blew up. People were coming in to see the work. So I think, it backfired really.
A spokesperson for Hancock Prospecting provided us with the following comment.
In relation to the portrait, it is correct that our taxpayer-funded National Gallery chose to depict Australia's most successful businessperson and huge contributor to our country in a demeaning way. Australian taxpayers deserve better from a national institution, one that should celebrate achievement and contribution to our country. President Milei of Argentina puts this more succinctly. The modern state has more than enough tools, which have grown in sophistication over time. We are not talking about an obvious state, like the neo-fascist or communist one, but rather a subtle and insidious state, which advances on the individual through art, propaganda, and cultural infiltration.
I think the first thing to say is we need to contextualise how significant Gina Rinehart's relationship has been to Australian sport.
To understand why it was swimmers coming to Gina's defence, first you need to understand that Gina Rinehart is the largest private funder of swimming this country has ever seen.
Gina Rinehart and her company, Hancock Prospecting, have single-handedly contributed to medals, gold medals at Australian Olympic Games. That is very clear.
Kieran Pender is a contributor to Guardian Australia.
I've had a long time interest in how sport is funded, and I've written a lot about the way the government funds high-performance sport in Australia. And I'd often at Swimming Australia swim meets, see the Hancock Prospecting logo.
So Gina's journey with Swimming Australia actually begins at one of the sport's lowest points.
She had a history of sponsoring swimming in her home state of Western Australia, but it was at the 2012 London Olympics, and listeners may remember that was an infamous Olympics from an Australian swim perspective. Australia did very badly in the pool, and there was the Still Knox scandal.
Your team members are accused of bullying, abusing alcohol and prescription drugs.
After some of our top swimmers admitted to using the banned sleeping pill Still Knox in the lead up to the London Olympics.
That led to an exodus of support for Swimming Australia. A lot of swimmers were in a difficult position financially, and Reinhardt and her company step in to fill that gap at a moment when otherwise swimming's in a real black hole.
Since 2012, it's reported that Gina has poured somewhere between $60 and $70 million into the sport. She's also funded rowing, volleyball, and artistic swimming.
The sports that she's chosen to support, they are not major commercial players in Australian sport. They're really often boom and bust sports in that they are very popular at the Olympics, and then that popular interest wanes outside the Olympic cycle. And although there is a significant amount of government funding in sport, that's spread across 40, 50 sports and has sort of come and gone at different points.
But Gina isn't funding these sports the way most sponsors do. Usually, a sponsor would give money to some sort of peak body, and then that body divides that money between athletes, costs, equipment, and so on. But instead,
Reinhardt and Hancock Prospecting have set up these schemes for swimming, for rowing, for a couple of other sports where there is direct salary amounts not going to the Sporting Federation and then sort of indirectly paying the wages, but directly paying the wages of athletes. We've seen reports that up to $30,000 a year is being paid directly to athletes in swimming and in rowing. Additionally, that's been topped up by a medal bonus scheme where, again, gold medals, world records and so on fetch $20,000, $30,000. And it means that there's a closer relationship because she and her company are literally putting money in the pockets of Australian athletes.
There's, of course, no rules being broken here. Any benefactor could do this.
There's a strangely personal relationship between the benefactor and those enjoying that financial support. She's literally paying their salaries.
With the dark days of London behind them, Australia's swimming team, with a fresh injection of cash, head into a new era in the pool, their new patron beside them.
Australia had an improved performance in Rio, but it was really in the last two Olympics that the Australian swim team has proven themselves to be really equal with the United States as the best in the world.
At the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, Gina waves the team off at the airport.
She designed pearl jewellery for the female athletes. She personally gave the male athletes iPads.
They bring back a total of 21 medals, including 9 golds. At Paris, it's more success. The team nabs 18 medals, 7 gold.
Australians love winning gold at the Olympics. I mean, I was in Paris. It was amazing.
And Gina is everywhere.
I couldn't be more proud. How could any of us in Australia be more proud of our Olympians than we are right now? I mean, lots don't understand the work that goes in, but I know a little bit of that background.
It was the talk of the pool that every night she was hosting a box at the swimming. She hosted the athletes on a river cruise on the Seine.
Hosted on the luxury yacht, the swimmers are decked out in gold Rossi boots, a gift from Gina and the company she owns.
So just have a great night. It's wonderful to be with you. And we'll speak to you a bit later about the menu. Okay, well, I think we should start getting in the boat.
She's clearly enjoyed being part of the Australian Olympic movement. There is a clear correlation between sports funding and high performance achievement. Of course, sometimes you have amazing stories where people with no funding go on to win gold. But one of the reasons Australia performs well above its population size in Olympic sport is because we pour huge amounts of money relative to other countries into sport. And so if you're not paying athletes well to do what they'll do other things. And swimmers have said that. Swimmers have admitted that this funding is one reason why they can stay.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. She's such a generous lady, not only, through her support financially, but she just gives so much time to our athletes.
Mrs. Reinhardt, thank you for letting us follow our dreams and, just do what we love. And to the team.
Basically, she makes it possible for us to be able to do what we love. Swimming really is a full-time job.
To be involved. She's such a caring and supportive lady. She's single-handedly saved our sport. She's been supporting the swim team for about 10 years now, the Paralympic team as well.
There's been a lot of talk in recent years about sports washing. Why does any company sponsor a team or brand? Because of the benefits of association.
It's a hard thing as an athlete because you know that sponsors are paying the bills.
David Pocock is a former captain of the National Rugby Union team, the Wallabies, and a current independent senator for Canberra. I wanted to talk to him because not only is he a former athlete, but he's a politician who's looked at this tension between sponsorship of sport and athletes.
This comes down to what Australians value and want the government to be funding. If we do love watching our swimmers and other athletes on the world stage representing us, breaking world records, doing Australia proud, then we need to actually fund these sports and fund these athletes properly. But at the moment, there just hasn't been the political will to give these athletes a any sort of stipend or income that they can actually live on while they dedicate so much of their life to their sport. And so, individuals like Gina Rinehart step in and fill that void. And you cannot say that it hasn't made an enormous difference to the Australian swimming team and the rowing team. We've seen record numbers of medals won. We've seen a whole bunch of swimmers who usually would have retired able to go to that next Olympics and show people what they can do with more experience under their belt. So swimming's definitely benefited from it. And I guess as a country, it's up to us to decide, should we leave them to the point where they have to be funded like this? And what are the ethical considerations when you have funding? My biggest concerns are around the influence that she has and her views on climate change and sort of winding back environmental regulation, which we're all, and particularly young people, are going to face the consequences of.
A spokesperson for Hancock Prospecting provided the following response in regards to allegations of sports washing and their support of athletes.
Without this support, the financial burden usually falls on their families, especially parents, who make enormous personal sacrifices to fund training, travel and competition costs so their children can represent Australia. Our support is not about self-publicity or so-called sports washing. It's about our athletes having the opportunity to represent our nation to the best of their ability.
When you have that sponsor stepping into that void, as you mentioned, where does that leave athletes if they wanted to back a social or environmental issue like climate change or marriage equality or the Indigenous voice to Parliament, for example? If you've got a sponsor who's got very well-known views on those issues, where does that leave the athlete?
Well, I think you'd be in a very tight spot if you wanted to keep that money, which was potentially allowing you to do the thing that you had dreamt of doing, or make public comment or make a stand on something that you thought was really important to you and people who'd supported you and what you think is good for your community and ultimately Australia. So
while there is nothing on the record that suggests that any swimmers were prevented from expressing their personal views, there was a controversy a few years earlier involving Gina, her billions and sport that demonstrates the potential for conflict.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So I'm Linda Pearce. I wrote my first netball story in the 1980s. I still write about netball today. And yeah, I've been doing this as long as I can remember, basically.
Linda Pearce is a sports journalist for Code Sports. You're a netball tragic, is what you're saying, Linda.
Possibly.
In 2022, the sport of netball dominates the national conversation, and the name in every headline was Donnell Wallam, a Noongar woman from Western Australia. She's a goal shooter. So first of all, let's go to Donnell. Can you describe Donnell Wallam as a player?
She's an exciting player. She's come from a basketball background, so she's got a bit of flair. She isn't afraid to take a long shot. She's passionate, and she certainly didn't come through the development pathway of Netball Australia like most of the diamonds that we see. She grew up 2 hours south of Perth in a little town called Harvey, and she just was sort of freewheeling in a footy netball league when she got spotted. It got suggested to her she should be playing at state league level. She doubted she was good enough. She arrived, won 2 league MVPs. Next thing, she's at the Leeds Rhinos, having never before left Western Australia, let alone Australia, and killing it over there.
So in April that year, Donnell gets the nod, an official call-up to play for the Diamonds at the end of the year, becoming just the 3rd Indigenous woman to be called up for the national squad. But it comes at a very rocky time for the sport because much like swimming did after the London Olympics, Netball Australia was in need of a sponsor.
Netball was on its knees financially. There was $4 million in debt. There was talk of maybe the sport goes under, which I never thought was even a vague possibility, but still, that was the narrative.
Netball Australia signs a deal in September with Hancock Prospecting for $15 million over 4 years. And so the Diamonds were set to have the Hancock Prospecting logo emblazoned onto their dresses. That's supposed to happen in a test match against New Zealand. Donnell is slated to travel with the team, but not to play. In the lead up to those games, the players hold a training session in Canberra. And at a players-only meeting, Donnell says to her teammates that she's uncomfortable with the idea of playing with the Hancock Prospecting logo on her uniform because of comments made by the late Lang Hancock, Gina's dad. These comments, broadcast in the 80s, were highly racist. In an interview, Lang spoke callously about sterilising Indigenous Australians. And just a warning, if you haven't heard them before, you should know that his views and his comments are very confronting.
Those that have been assimilated into earning good living or earning wages amongst the civilised areas, that have been accepted into society, and they have accepted society and can handle society, I'd leave them well alone. The ones that are no good to themselves and can't accept things, the half-caste, and this is where most of the trouble comes, I would dope the water up so that they were sterile and would breed themselves out in the future, and that would solve the problem.
And then it emerged that there had been exemptions granted to other players in different sports in the past. So that was something that it was worth exploring. And when Donnell got up in front of her teammates and said that she would be interested in seeking an exemption, they basically said to her that she had been marginalised her whole life and they weren't going to abandon her now. They would wear what she wore, and so if she didn't wear the Hancock Prospecting logo, they would stand with her. It would have been, I can't imagine how much strength that took, to be honest. And I also can't imagine that she would have envisaged the storm that ensued.
The news gets out before Donnell even plays her first game. Conservative media is outraged.
This is how it's supposed to work. Fortunate Australians are supposed to help less fortunate Australians, and passionate Australians are supposed to give something for us to cheer for. But netball, at least some of the players, don't want her money. What Gina Rinehart has been able to do for swimming, she can do for netball. She should be allowed to do it, and you should enthusiastically cheer on.
The pressure on Donnell must have been intense.
Yes. There were people everywhere saying, who do they think they are, these netballers? I mean, the sport's got no money. Why would they think that they can sink a deal like this? You know, they get off their high horse, all of these sorts of things. It was completely unfair in my book.
Under immense pressure and seeking to defuse the situation, Donnell actually agrees to wear the uniform with the logo, but the concession comes too late. In October, Gina and Hancock Prospecting decide to walk away from the deal and take their $15 million with them.
What do they say? Go woke and you go broke, right? And isn't Netball Australia about to learn that the hard way?
Gina's Roy Hill mine also stopped sponsoring Netball WA and the Super Netball team, the West Coast Fever. In a statement released at the time, Hancock Prospecting included the following, which we've had read out by a voice actor.
Contrary to recent media, Hancock has not insisted that its name be worn by the Australian Diamonds in the current Constellation Cup series when overseas, and was advised that the netballers had no concerns in wearing the name on the team dress for the series. Hancock and Roy Hill do not wish to add to netball's disunity problems, and accordingly Hancock has advised Netball Australia that it has withdrawn from its proposed partnership, effective immediately.
And how were players feeling at that moment when Gina Rinehart announces that she's walking with her $15 million?
I think they were pretty stunned. I think they still thought there would be a way to fix this, or a way to just find a solution that worked for everybody, given that Donnell had actually said, I'll wear the dress.
And so it's among all this, in the eye of this media cyclone and in the fallout of the retracted sponsorship, that Donnell's debut finally arrives.
It's in Newcastle. Everyone's expecting it to be quite an emotional game. There's stories, should she start or is that too much pressure? Should she just come on late when the pressure's off? In the end, she came on in the last quarter and scored the winning goal with a layup, and there wasn't a dry eye anywhere at that point. It was a real Hollywood script finish.
To Australia, Weston, she finds Proud, Wallen to win it for Australia!
And so what's your best read on why she walked and pulled the 15 million?
I think it's no one tells Gina Rinehart what to do, perhaps. I think it all just got too messy and difficult. I just think they wanted to make a statement about, we were going to give you all this money and you didn't play ball.
Both the netball saga and the swimming saga can be seen as exercises in power. Who has it and who doesn't? In the case of Gina, as the country's wealthiest person, it's pretty obvious she has a lot of power. And I think it's clear what she wants you to look at and what she'd rather you not see. But Vincent Namatjira, the artist who painted that portrait, he's trying to get you to look at something too.
Australia in Colour is a portrait of my experience and influences. I've painted significant people who have had an influence on me, whether directly or indirectly, whether for good or for bad. It's also a portrait of the way I see Australia. People who have shaped this country for better or worse, in small or large ways.
Yeah, so Vincent's often talked about the idea of power and relationships and who holds the power. But the act of painting these people means that, they're no longer that person. They're essentially just paint on a canvas. So everybody is equal when they are painted on a canvas.
It's quite an incredible chain of events. Vincent, talking about the frenzy, said people didn't have to like his paintings, but he hoped that they took the time to look and think, why has this Aboriginal bloke painted these powerful people? What is he trying to say? For you, what's the answer to that question? And will the answer to that question be different for everyone who views the work?
I think the answer will be different for a lot of people, but hopefully have the same baseline. So, of course, for me, I understand the power and privilege of the colonial history of this country, the way that Aboriginal people have been dispossessed, the way that, within Vincent's own family.
Because Vincent's great-grandfather was Albert Namatjira, one of Australia's most famous and celebrated artists, known for his watercolours of ghost gums, gorges and red mountain ranges.
Those incredible landscapes of Central Australia, they were so popular at one point that they were in every government building, schools, hospitals, everywhere. Albert Namatjira was one of the most popular figures in the country during his day and age. He had a street parade through Sydney when he visited. He was on the cover of Women's Weekly or whatever it was called in the 1950s. He'd reached this popular consciousness.
But he was not wealthy. He was denied the ability to purchase land or build a house.
He wasn't able to control his own affairs or accumulate his own wealth. He couldn't buy the properties that he wanted to create intergenerational prosperity within his own family.
In 1957, Namatjira became the first Aboriginal person to be granted conditional Australian citizenship. In 1958, he was charged with supplying alcohol to Aboriginal people and spent 2 months in prison. He died the following year. In 1983, the copyright to his work was even removed from his family, and it wasn't restored until 2017. During that time, his family members received no royalties from the sale of his work. And so Albert was not able to create any intergenerational wealth. Furthermore, Vincent wasn't even aware of his great-grandfather's legacy until he was already a teenager. When he was just a boy, Vincent's mother tragically died in a car accident, and he found himself in the foster care system in Perth. It wasn't until moving to the Northern Territory after high school that he discovered his great-grandfather's legacy.
Something like 70 years later, his great-grandson has kind of stepped into that same space, working within that legacy and that heritage. My connection with Vincent started in 2014, so it's been 10 years now.
In 2014, Bruce was working at the Queensland Art Gallery, where they happened to have a portrait of Albert, painted by Australian artist William Dargie.
And I remember getting a phone call essentially asking if they could come to view the Sir William Dargie portrait of Albert Namatjira. And of course I said, yeah, that would be fantastic. I'd be totally happy to host. And they came out to view the portrait. And Vincent was one of the shyest people I probably ever met in my life at that point. And he brought with him a small mirror and a box of pencils. And he sat down in front of the painting. He grabbed his mirror, he put it against a sculpture so that he could see himself reflected in front of the portrait of Albert. And he just sat and sketched himself with that portrait. It was a really amazing moment because it was a way to kind of reestablish that family connection. And that was one of the first major portraits that Vincent painted. And now that portrait is in the Queensland Art Gallery collection alongside the Sir William Dargie portrait of Albert Namatjira.
Wow.
One of the things that it does really say to me in juxtaposing Gina's position and Vincent's position is about intergenerational wealth, intergenerational poverty, and the ways in which she's been able to inherit great wealth and power. And Vincent has been able to inherit an artistic heritage and legacy. And he's wielded it in a way that has, for a moment at least, disempowered the wealth and privilege of Gina's heritage. Mm. So for me, that's one of the most powerful things that I see in these works. There's so much about history, the colonial history and legacy. Mm. For me, it's really about understanding the legacies of both of those people and the fact that, you know, on this occasion, art wins over money, which is amazing. And Vincent being an Aboriginal man from an absolutely impoverished community, the amazing thing is that, you know, through art, he was able to have that voice and dismantle that power. The powerful person didn't get their way. The painting stayed on the walls, and we're able to have that conversation that he's been painting about, that he's been talking about for a decade now.
Just picking up on what you're saying there, Gina's wealth and privilege and that intergenerational wealth and privilege has come from the lands of Aboriginal people. It's mining the very earth of the country.
Absolutely. The most powerful people, the most wealthy people in this country really are connected to that extractive history of mining in this country and the ways in which that has both absolutely removed Aboriginal people from those areas, often broken the connection that Aboriginal people need to prove to have any sort of native title to the lands. And yet that power we see in Vincent's work, and in this situation we can see that power isn't absolute. It can be flipped on its head, even if for a minute. You know, it gives some sense of hope to a lot of people, I think.
Hi, I'm Barry Cassidy.
And I'm Tony Barry, co-host of Guardian Australia's Back-to-Back Barrys.
It's the final week of the campaign and the leaders are doing a final dash to Saturday's polls. But is it all a bit too late to deliver a message that cuts through?
We'll be here twice this week, Thursday and Sunday, and we want to hear from you. What's going to make your mind up and what are the big issues that you're observing? Let us know.
Email us at backtobackbarrys@theguardian.com.
Vincent Namatjira's portrait can be seen as an invitation to examine Australia's colonial past, and Gina's dad's racist comments are emblematic of that history. But no one in the Hancock family has ever really acknowledged them. Gina Rinehart has to this day never disavowed Lang Hancock's racist comments. A Hancock prospecting spokesperson provided the following comment.
Hancock Prospecting and Roy Hill fund initiatives that improve the health and well-being of Indigenous Australians, support essential services in remote and rural areas, and foster participation in employment, sport, education and Indigenous arts. Our commitment cannot be regarded as compliance, as we go far beyond compliance. We invest in meaningful, long-term partnerships that create real opportunities.
Throughout this series, you've heard portions of my conversation with Gina's son, John Langley Hancock. I wanted to know what he thought. Obviously, Lang made some very racist comments about sterilising the water of Aboriginal people. Is that something you're happy to disavow?
Did he literally think that we should put steriliser in the water? I don't believe so.
And you agree that had they been meant literally, that they are inexcusable?
Of course. But I don't believe they were meant literally.
You agree that regardless if those comments were meant literally or figuratively, they are still inexcusable?
Yes, inexcusable.
And why don't you think Gina came out and publicly disavowed those comments as many asked her to do at the time?
I haven't worked out why. There is also the PR strategy of just saying nothing. I don't believe that was appropriate in this case.
In episode 3, you also heard from one of Lang's close friends, John Singleton.
A great friendship, a really great friendship.
It occurred to me that this was something that was probably discussed between them. And so I asked him about it. And when I did, he ended up telling me something really surprising. Now, I've saved the most difficult question for the last one, John.
Yeah.
Which is, I wanted to ask you about Lang Hancock's comments about sterilising the water of Aboriginal people.
Yeah.
Did you ever talk to him about that?
I certainly did. Because Lang was in his flat at Circular Quay when he did that. He did that as a sick throwaway line.
What was your reaction to Lang's comments?
So I was found it horrific. And Lang couldn't understand why he was staying at the Circular Quay. I was at Avoca Beach, in a little beach house. And I said, Lang, I can't get down there because I've got kids. I've got 7 kids to look after. But why don't you come up here? Which he did. He drove up, a terrible driver, probably irrelevant. He came to stay with me in a little fibro place on Avoca Beach. And he just was an emotional wreck. Why me? I said, mate, do you know what you've said? Oh, but I didn't mean that in context. Lang, are you kidding, mate? So we went for long walks along the beach. I spent hours talking to him, hours and hours and hours, about some of the things he said that weren't meant to hurt, but how deeply they did hurt. And Lang, well, probably one of the few good things I did for Lang is that I had him be far more tolerant. In the cold light of day, you read that in the headline or on TV and news. It's horrible, horrible.
But obviously, in that long walk along the beach,
yes,
you weren't able to change his mind?
Yes, I did. I didn't change it.
You did change his mind?
I didn't change his mind. I changed his way of expressing. So I think Lang was foolish in that way. He didn't mean any harm, but it came across terribly, and I told him so. And he did his best to correct it. He failed, by the way. He failed. He failed to be forgiven. That was unforgivable of me, and like most unforgivable things, it wasn't forgiven.
This became an issue more recently when Donnell Wallam, a WA netballer, expressed concern about Lang's comments when Hancock Prospecting was a sponsor of the netball team. And Gina took her sponsorship money and walked away.
Yes.
A lot of people commented at the time that that was a missed opportunity for Gina to disavow Lang's comments and to try and right that wrong.
You're right, but also she had to choose between disavowing her own father.
John Singleton says that from what he can see, the reason Gina has never disavowed Lang's comments goes back to the falling out between father and daughter that happened during the 90s over Lang's relationship with Rose Porteous.
Gina genuinely, totally blames herself. I think deep down, how do you forgive yourself for not communicating with your dad, who was your whole life, and vice versa, for the last few years of his life? I know that she's made a decision to honour her dad's memory, and therefore you won't, I don't think you can get Gina to say, at whatever commercial going to Gina, she won't say that Lang was silly or Lang should have known better. You won't hear those words.
Couldn't she try and make amends?
You're saying, could she have righted the wrong by explaining what I'm explaining? Probably. But Gina also is very shy by nature, very, very shy. She's very in awe of her dad, loves him very much. And she couldn't, I don't think it's in her makeup at all to see any fault in her father. She went through that period. They reconciled through death. For Gina to go further in blaming her dad I don't think she had in her. Her dad was back to being a hero. She'd lost those vital years.
It would be difficult for her to disavow those comments now.
She could disavow them, though. It's never too late. History, it's too late with the existing community. But if it's on the record now, it can help things the next generation or the next. Because this problem's not going away anywhere.
There's also a much larger conversation that needs to be had here about Lang Hancock, extending far beyond just these comments that he made in the 80s, because it's not just his words that need to be considered. Long before he was a mining magnate, Lang lived a whole life out there in the Pilbara. He and his family before him had managed enormous pastoral stations. Among them was Mulga Downs, the place of Gina's childhood that you heard about back in episode 1. Lang lived there as a young man in the 1920s, and he was there as a station manager in the 1930s and 40s. At a time where working conditions were discriminatory and widespread systemic racist policies were prevalent. The era of Lang Hancock is also the era of the stolen generation, the removal of Indigenous children, and of stolen wages.
So he's living on Mulga Downs, managing the station. I think sheep at that time, they had cattle and they had sheep at different times.
This is Stuart Reid. You might recognise him from previous episodes. He interviewed Lang for the National Library of Australia.
You've got to round up sheep and bring them in for shearing, all that sort of stuff. So he's on horseback through all this time. And there are Aboriginal people working on the station and Aboriginal people living on the station as well. And he had very disparaging views about them. Because one of the questions I asked was if he had learnt anything from the Aboriginal people. He said, well, you learn what to eat and what not to eat, but other than that, they've got nothing to teach anybody. They know nothing. They've done nothing. They have never built anything. They haven't even built a house. They've never built anything mechanical. So that was kind of his view. And I asked him about ceremony, because ceremony, and he said ceremony was still very much active on the country in those days. And the ceremonies, I asked him about the ceremonies themselves, and he said, well, apart from some of them women can attend, some of them women can't attend. He said, but they're all just repetitive chanting. They've only got about 3 words, and they just keep going over and over those things. And he did tell the story of, because I asked him also about, this came up in the context of citizens' rights, which he thinks was a disaster. So the granting of citizens' rights to Aboriginal people, in his view, gave them 3 rights. The right to pay taxes, the right to fornicate with white people, and the right to drink alcohol. And all 3 had been disastrous for Aboriginal people. That's his view, as he put it. And this is a view he's said publicly many times. So I'm not, revealing any secrets from this transcript when I talk about that. That's been a view that he's expressed widely.
Did you ask him about those comments?
Yes.
And what did he say about them?
Yeah, well, he repeated them. He didn't resolve from any of it. It has to do, I think, with a mindset about superiority and his feeling that he himself was a superior human being. So it wasn't just a racial thing, but he did see things in terms of a hierarchy of superiority.
How did you feel when Lang died? What was it?
Nothing. Later, at the end of the 90s, I was working as coordinator of the unit, and a woman came into the library and she wanted to see me as the interviewer. And she said, I've just read this interview with Lang Hancock, and you sat there and let him say all these outrageous things, these terrible things, and what an awful man he is. And she got really quite hot under the collar about me not challenging him on these things. And I thought, okay, I've done my job here. The true Lang has come out, and it's made someone who dislikes that kind of person really, really angry.
The other very significant thing you need to know about Lang Hancock is that over the years, allegations have been made that during his time at Mulga Downs, Lang fathered multiple children with Aboriginal women who lived or worked at the station before the birth of Gina Rinehart. The first was in 1992, when a woman called Hilda Kickett comes forward in a TV interview. She was born in 1943, 11 years before Gina. Her mother was a cook at the homestead on the station. Then, a few months later, another Indigenous woman also comes forward. A woman called Stella Robinson tells the Perth Sunday Times she was born in 1932, when Lang was only 23, which would make her the firstborn Hancock child. She too was conceived at Mulga Downs. Stella goes on to say that Lang's father also had a child with an Aboriginal woman at Mulga Downs, and that Lang has a half-sister called Minette Doris. All 3 women are no longer alive. Did you ever speak to Lang about the reports that he had fathered Aboriginal children?
Yes.
What did he say about it?
Not that I know of. He didn't deny that he had relationships with Aboriginal girls, but he didn't know. I trusted Lang implicitly.
But Lang talked about having relationships with Aboriginal women?
Yes. Good on him. Yes, he did with me.
And there's an incredible power imbalance here, though, as well, right?
Oh, terrible, terrible, terrible. But you realise that Lang Hancock was just an unknown white man. He wasn't a multi-billionaire, he was just another bloke living off the bush.
After Lang's death, a Hancock family lawyer said the following, quote, "Everybody who knew Lang and his father was quite adamant it was not Lang's style. That wasn't the kind of thing Lang Hancock would do. I've spoken to young men who worked around Mulga Downs with Lang, and I've spoken to confidants who say nothing like this was ever mentioned or rumoured." Gina Rinehart has never acknowledged any of these women as relatives. We asked her about this, but received no response to that question. No DNA test has ever been performed. During my conversation with Gina's son, John Hancock, I also asked him about the claims. However, he was not willing to go on the record. He has said in the past that, quote, "My mother and others who I've spoken with who knew Lang well were of the view that Hilda is not Lang's daughter." It's been reported that in 1997, John approached Hilda at the direction of his mother, asking her to sign a declaration that stated George Hancock, and not Lang, was her father. Hilda refused. She has been quoted as saying that she would not make a claim for a part of the Hancock estate during her life, saying her life was, quote, "far more rewarding than material stuff," and that, "why should I?"
Hello.
G'day, Kelvin. How you going? It's Sarah here. I'm glad I tracked you down. I think I contacted quite a few Kicketts on Facebook. Hilda Kickett went on to have several children. Her son, Kelvin Kickett, still lives in Western Australia.
Yeah, but Kickett's, that's my dad's side. So Mum was married into the Kickett, so...
He has grown up with the understanding that he is Lang's unrecognised grandson and that Gina Rinehart is his aunt. Tell me about your mum.
My nana was working there. That's how it all come together. Nana was a housemaid, and that's when Lang used to go up there. This is what I can piece together. And he used to go up there looking for iron ore and at the station, and my nana was a housemaid there, and that's how Mum come about.
Hilda was born in Port Hedland, about a 4-hour drive north from Mulga Downs. Afterwards, she was taken to an orphanage in Perth.
Yeah, but she got looked after, see. Old Lang sent Mum to a school what she got educated in, a boarding school.
Kelvin claims that Lang made sure she was well taken care of. So he paid for her schooling?
Yeah. Yep.
What did she tell you about him?
Well, she knew that he was her father, and apparently there was visits at the boarding school. She you know, there'd be new shoes, there'd be new this and that, what he used to send there. And no wonder where it come from, but she knew someone. Yeah.
Hilda Kickett spoke to News Corp in 2012. She talked about her fondest memories with Lang when she spent a week at his home on the Swan River in Perth, playing with her alleged sister, Gina, who was at that time only 2 years old. Hilda was 12. She says, quote, "We used to play on the river. He used to flick water. Gina was in this big blessed pram. I used to get her out and put her in the water, just put her to soak."
She tried her best to connect with him, and that's how come she got so sick and tired, because they didn't want to recognise her. She tried her best. She just wanted to be recognised by Gina. It wasn't about the money, it was just recognition, and like growing up without a father you don't know, or you want to find out, don't you?
Yeah, of course. And it obviously saddened her quite a lot.
Yes, most of her life she was, because she couldn't find out who she was.
Hilda attempted to visit Lang on his deathbed, accompanied by the Catholic Archbishop of Perth. She says she was denied the chance to see him.
The That's what my mother wanted, recognition and to know who she was and to know who her father was.
And she wanted Gina to acknowledge it too, though, right?
Yeah. Wouldn't you for a sister? Wouldn't you want to, you know? If you had a sister, you want to know. It wasn't my mum's fault as it come about. And Lang had a lot of influence on Aboriginal people, not ladies, men, because he was the boss, you know, of the station, and whatever he said had to go. We was up there months and months, and, you know, old bungee mans, and that's how Mum come about, so, yeah.
Sorry, I don't know what old bungee man is, sorry.
Bungee mans, all white mans go running around with Aboriginal ladies.
Oh, right. Okay, which there was a lot of that happening in Mulga Downs by the looks of it.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
I lived with this secret myself because it was handed down to me, passed on to me by one of his actual daughters, and Auntie Hilda. And that memory still blows me away to this day.
I also talked to Devon Kumara.
I'm a Nyunga Yamati warrior from the Yuat, Wajak, Amunyu, Barimaya nations.
He runs the Aboriginal Males Healing Centre near Newman. He's also Hilda Kickett's nephew. So tell me how you found out.
We were staying at Auntie Hilda's. Auntie Hilda was such a beautiful woman and her husband, God rest their souls. And they were the go-to Aboriginal family that looked after you. Auntie Hilda, there was too much pain for her, but she did share it with you, you know? And she was quite open when you asked, "Oh, Auntie, is that true that Lang Hancock was into your dad?" Yep. I just, when she said it, it was like an epiphany. I don't know if Kelvin showed you a photo of her, but oh my gosh, she's just a spitting image of Lang Hancock.
Rose Porteous, Lang's widow, also recognised Hilda Kickett after Lang's death, telling the West Australian that he had told her he was the father. She also spoke about the similarity between Hilda and Lang, saying, quote, "If you put glasses on her, which I did when she came to my home, and I couldn't believe it. I said, 'Sorry, but you are not very pretty,' because my husband was not a pretty man. The blood that runs in her is the same blood that is in Gina."
But all that family deserves to have a share of that wealth. That's their lawful right, because he's their father. He's their grandfather, he's their uncle, whatever the case may be. Even those kids are there, of Gina's, they need to be able to be told as well and be informed that this is your family.
During our conversation, Devon imagines a world in which Gina Rinehart embraces her alleged relatives, the many extended family members.
That'd be lovely to watch. And a news camera filming it. The sisters meeting their aunties and they're all black. That'd be just too lovely. It would be extraordinary for reconciliation. You know, there's legitimate nieces and nephews. She's auntie too, and she denies that.
It's important to not just look at these claims, which I should stress are untested, in isolation. It's also important to look at their historical context, what was happening at places like Mulga Downs in the 1930s and 40s. It's really almost untold. It's glaringly absent from stories about the foundation of the Hancock family and its wealth. This was a family that was undeniably a colonial force in Western Australia, one of the most notable settler families in the state's northwest. But the story of Mulga Downs, as told by the Hancocks and Gina, rarely, if ever, mentions the predominantly Indigenous workforce that helped keep the station running through much of the 19th and 20th centuries. But it's also, I guess, why this truth-telling is so important, right?
Correct, that's right. At the end of the day, what we give thanks for at the end of the day, we just want some truth to be put out there with that particular person, that woman.
As part of this series, Guardian Australia has uncovered unreported documents obtained through State Archives of WA that shed new light on the relationship between Lang Hancock and one of the children he was alleged to have fathered, Stella Robinson. These documents are concerned with events from the year 1940, when the government, acting in accordance with its policies that created the stolen generation, removed Stella and Minette Doris from Mulga Downs. Stella was 6 and Minette was 8. Government correspondence shows that Stella was discovered by government inspectors after pulling over a truck to question some station workers. We've had a voice actor read out a letter written by one of those inspectors.
These men appeared to be somewhat agitated. I noticed that a tarpaulin, which was covered over a portion of the tabletop, was moving. I removed the tarpaulin, thus uncovering 2 native adult females and the half-caste child, Stella. The girl was placed in the police car. At the time of her removal, her mother was reportedly at Roebourne Hospital. When about 100 yards from the camp, Minette took to the bush, with me in hot pursuit. And after about half a mile run, I eventually caught her and placed her in our car along with Stella.
In a letter that has never before been reported, Lang Hancock writes to the State Minister for the Northwest. He seeks ministerial intervention after the children are taken away. He refers to the children as having been kidnapped and wants them returned. He even suggests swapping them for some other Aboriginal children. Can I read you this letter from Hancock and see what you think?
Sure.
So he says, in the absence of the manager of this station, the local police officer and inspector ran down and captured 2 half-caste children who were decently clothed and fed, and cruelly took them from their mothers to be a burden on the state, despite the fact that they and their parents were fed, clothed and insured by us. No letter of explanation was left or forwarded. 24 miles from us, there are 9 starving, ill-clothed, half-caste and quadroon children, of whom both the inspector and the police have been notified, but nothing has been done about them. We would suggest that the 2 children be returned to us and 2 of the starving mites substituted, as there is no justification for wasting money and inflicting cruelty upon them, especially when every penny should be spent in keeping Hitler from the door.
Yeah, that's so typical of that generation. Yes. It does not surprise me at all. And there are many Aboriginal people out there that's got those types of letters.
So people in the Pilbara know all these stories, right?
Of course they do. Of course they do.
The trove of documents also exposes the racist and protectionist era government concerns about sexual relationships between white men and Aboriginal women. Part of that protectionist era law forbade sexual relations between white and Aboriginal people unless they were married. The documents show that government workers repeatedly discussed conditions at Mulga Downs under Lang Hancock's management, and his suitability to hold a permit to employ Indigenous workers is questioned. They say that the camp, quote, must have been used by white men for the satisfaction of their sexual desires. Lang Hancock is not named in these documents as being under investigation for sexual relations with Aboriginal women. In fact, I'll read you the direct quote. It says, this is in response to Hancock's letter. I'm forced to the opinion that if Hancock considers that the fact of working 2 half-caste native females aged 12 and 9 respectively at the homestead during the day and sending them into the native camp to sleep is fair and proper treatment for these children, well, his sense of fairness is somewhat warped.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
How powerful would it be for Gina Rinehart to come out now and acknowledge the history? I appreciate that it wasn't her and it wasn't, she didn't...
It's her legacy, just like her mining heiress to the mining rights and tenement that he had, her father had.
It's part of her history.
Yeah. It's a part of her life. It's who she is. That's what makes it at this day. I mean, the whole thing of, I just can't get over that 40 billion. It's just so sad. One individual could be worth that much, and yet we're dying like dropping like flies in the filter. Literally, Aboriginal people are dropping like flies. And not only that, I mean, there's families out there that have an entitlement through birth to that money.
There'd be some people who would say, look, most of this happened before Gina Rinehart was born. Why would it matter if she acknowledged this history now? What difference would it make? Past is the past.
I'll put it to you this way. Why do they remember Anzacs? Yes, we forget. Well, that's the same for Aboriginal people. Lest we forget. Lest we forget. All those things that you just said when you're reading that letter was of a system that dehumanised us. And that dehumanisation is continuing to this day.
And so if she was able to publicly acknowledge this history, what difference could it make?
A huge difference. A massive difference, because we've got a recognition from a well-respected billionaire. So somebody like that coming out and recognising the past and being put on the back foot and responding to it, well, it's just going to show this country what needs to be, the truth or the untruth. And they've always made, on our truths, made them out to be untruths. Or they've put it in that context that you've had. That's the past. Move on. That's the whole thing. We cannot move on.
Indigenous Australians can call 13-YARN on 139276 for information and crisis support. Gina is reported by me, Sarah Martin. The series producer is Joe Koning and the executive producer is Shelley Hepworth. The head of audio is Miles Martignoni. This episode was also produced by Faza Draki and Jess Hamilton. Additional production was by Karishma Luthria, Isabella Lee and Camilla Hannon. Sound design in this episode was by Joe Koning.